It's time to chill out and get ready for a mediocre Q&A live stream. If you're old enough, grab yourself your favorite adult beverage, and if you're not, stick with apple juice. Put your feet up and relax. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. And now let's cue up the intro music. Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the HVACR videos live stream. I'm your host, Chris. It's me. I've been your only host, and I'll probably be your only host forever. You know, I don't think anybody else would ever want to do this show. It's kind of boring, at least to me. But anyways, here I am. So, the whole point of these live streams for the new people that are chiming in is just to consolidate questions from my videos. I get a bunch of questions, emails, YouTube comments, and a lot of the questions are repetitive. When I see some interesting questions or repetitive questions, I tend to answer them here on this live stream. This is also turned into a podcast. Now, I haven't been really keeping up on uploading it to the podcast, apps, whatever, Libsyn, or I think that's who I use, Libsyn, and then that updates it to all or uploads it to all the different places. But I don't know about you guys. When I'm driving down the road, I will literally just turn on the YouTube app and then just listen to a live stream as a podcast. And that's actually what YouTube does. They have this categorized as a podcast. So I'll definitely get with my daughter. She's the one that does all the uploading to the podcast things. And we'll try to get this updated to where we have all the current episodes up on the podcast apps. But like I said, you can literally just turn on the YouTube app and it's right there, and then you can just listen to it while you're driving or what say you, whatever you want to do. So welcome to everybody that's regular in here. I see a lot of great people in here. My buddy Jason Johnson. Jason just sent me a really cool email. I talk about this all the time, is that we have this really cool community. If you guys are listening to this or watching this on Facebook, on LinkedIn, it's all great. It doesn't benefit me on what, any differently on, if you watch it on whatever platform. But I will say there's a whole group of people. There's probably 40 people in the YouTube chat right now, and there's a lot of regulars, a lot of great people that are constantly in there. Jason Johnson's in there. Steve from Everything HVACR. Look at Scott Savage, Joe from Overtime Show, HVACR North, Mike B, Freon, Leon, Chipmunk, all these great people that are constantly in the chat. And the cool thing is that we've all become friends in a way, right? And we all share information. So Jason just sent me an email because he came across a cool tech bulletin article thing about VFDs and motors, and he just thought he should send it to me. And I really do appreciate that kind of stuff. And the same thing goes for a lot of other people too. We all share information. So I encourage you all to communicate with each other, share each other's emails, and bounce ideas off of each other, just feedback. Sometimes, for instance, I was considering, and I didn't do it, but I was considering taking on a new customer. And I had a little apprehension about that. So I called some fellow colleagues of mine, some friends of mine, and we kind of went back and forth. And I decided it wasn't a good idea to take on this customer because they literally just filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy today. Okay. So it's that kind of stuff. We all bounce each other's ideas and thoughts and different things, back and forth. And we can all kind of help each other, so it's a really, really awesome community. I encourage everybody out there to communicate with each other. And it's just great. I love this community. So thank you for coming in here. Thank you for being here. As usual, I got a bunch of stuff I want to talk about, and we'll definitely get on to some of my topics. And if you guys have things you want me to cover, feel free to throw them into the chat. If you can, put them on all in capital letters, all caps lock. And it helps me to see that it's a question for me, because again, there's a whole community in here, and I encourage you all to have conversations with each other too. So the capital letters, when it's all in caps lock, it helps me to know that it's a question or a comment geared towards me, or, it could just be another conversation going on in the chat. So let's see what else we got going on in the chat right now. So reading through here. Let's see. Good guy. Thank you very much for that super chat. I really do appreciate it. You don't have to do that, but it is really appreciated. So thank you very much. Definitely helps out the stream. So see what else we got. We just did an A2L seminar class, and you guess you have to store it upright in the vans. Yeah, John. So that is a topic and something that we have to consider with some of these A2L refrigerants. The way that we store them in our vehicles is going to be different. Okay. And I don't know if it applies to every single one yet, because I think I've heard some conflicting information about different manufacturers, but yeah, with the A2L refrigerants coming up, there's all kinds of different changes. Okay. One thing I'm going to encourage you guys to do is to be very cautious about buying into some of the hype. Okay. With the A2L refrigerants. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of misleading information out there. There's a lot of manufacturers' information that it reads a little odd. Like, for instance, there's a very large refrigerant manufacturer. I'm not going to name them, but I got an email from them, and it was talking about the A2L refrigerants, and it was saying our refrigerant is the best. How did they phrase it? It said I'm paraphrasing. It said something along the lines of our refrigerant is the best replacement for R410A. It works the best. It's the easiest conversion. And that right there struck me as odd, because there is no conversion to an A2L refrigerant right now. Okay. There's only a complete system change out with A2L refrigerants. And the way that was written and typed, it doesn't sound right. Now, I'm not saying that won't happen in the future. It very well might. But at this point in time right now, you are not converting a fully operating system to an A2L refrigerant without changing the entire system. Okay. At this point in time, same thing goes with tools. Okay. There's a lot of hype right now from a lot of different tool manufacturers, and they all want to get out with their publicity machines, and they want to say, hey, this is our new A2L ready insert name of whatever manifold gauge set, and it's like, there's no difference between the normal manifold gauge set and the A2L manifold gauge set. So don't waste your money buying a bunch of tools just because they say A2L ready, unless you have to. Okay. I was talking to a buddy of mine, an old coworker that used to work with us a long, long time ago, and he was reaching out to me, and he mentioned that where he's at, the inspectors are very strict, and they're going to want him to have A2L ready tools. I still don't really buy that hype. I think that's a bunch of marketing baloney. Okay. Now, there is some things that we need to be cautious about with the A2L refrigerants. There's some things we need to be ready for. So I encourage everybody out there to take a class on the A2L refrigerants. But I'm going to put this out there right now. There is no certification you have to work on A2L refrigerants unless it's mandated by your company or the job site you're working on. There's no government certification that says you have to have passed this test to be able to work with A2L refrigerants. That doesn't exist either. And I'm going to throw this out there. There is no propane in A2L refrigerants. And I'm going to say it again. There is no propane in A2L refrigerants. There's a lot of misinformation out there. Okay. Did you know that if you have been working in the HVAC industry for the last 10 years, okay, you've already been working with R32. And wait, you're confused because R32 is one of the new A2L refrigerants, right? But did you know that 410A consists of R32 and 125A? The way they're mixed together makes R410A. We've all been working with R32 for a while now. Just happen to have 125 in there mixed in to make the refrigerant 410A. And they mixed it in there to reduce the flame propagation, I think is what the fancy word that they're using. Another thing to understand with the A2L refrigerants is that there's some basic safety practices we have to follow, but you don't need to be scared. Just follow the basic refrigeration safety practices that you should have been following for a long time. Cut out as many components as possible. Sweep a system with nitrogen before you start brazing on it. Just that kind of stuff, right? A2L refrigerants, your system's not just going to blow up unless someone does something horribly wrong and mixes refrigerants and does something really strange, okay? You're going to be fine. And it's not that big of a deal. Now, this is coming from a refrigeration guy. I've been working with refrigeration systems for many, many years, and I'm not an expert. I'm not the best person in the world. I'm not the most qualified person in the world, but I've been working with a lot of different refrigerants. I came up in a time when we were transitioning from R12 and R502 towards the end of it, right? Transitioning from R12 to 502 and 502 to 22 and 404, right? And there was a lot of retrofit refrigerants or drop-in refrigerants that we used. MP39, 401, I think that is 401A, but MP39, 409A, there's so many, 408A, there was so many different refrigerants that we used that were just drop-in refrigerants, right? Let me key this or explain this point right now. Drop-in refrigerant does not mean you can mix. There is no mixing of any refrigerants, right? You're not putting something, an alternative to R22, mixing it with R22. That's not how it was designed. That's not how you're supposed to do it. I don't care what your cousin's brother's uncle told you that you could do who works at a supply house because he's an idiot, okay? You're not mixing refrigerants, right? So there's a lot of misinformation. It's your job to educate yourself, to ask questions. Don't just trust what the supply house counter guy tells you because his cousin Randy said that his brother's uncle's niece's nephew heard that you can not pull a vacuum on a system or something like that because that guy's an idiot, okay? Do your research. If it sounds too good to be true, it's too good to be true, okay? Pretty common sense stuff here. All right, let's see what else we got going on in the chat right now. Mike B says, getting a new customer is a good idea, but you got to wonder why they are shopping for a new contractor. Sometimes it's not the contractor. That is very true. I'm going to tell you guys something. I can't name names, and I don't want to go into this too far, but I'm going to tell you guys something, little snippet, okay? I just lost a customer. Life happens, okay? I lost a customer. A few restaurants of mine, they're using a new company. I kid you not. We got a phone call. So this happened about a month ago. Okay. And they've been using a new company. So be it. I'm not mad at the new company. Life happens. They move on. Well, it's a bummer. It was kind of a gut punch to lose that customer, but life happens. Stuff, I can tell you that we didn't do anything wrong. Okay. We didn't have an excessive amount of callbacks, but for whatever reason, the customer chose to move on, and that's fine. Okay. Customers have the right to be able to do that kind of stuff. But last week, we got a phone call at my office, and this will just blow your mind. We got a phone call at my office, and it said, hey, I'm from XX company, and I'm working at XX restaurant, and the restaurant manager told me that you had just topped off this system, and I was wondering if you could answer a question for me. So my secretary called me and she said, so-and-so from this company is working at this restaurant and he wants to know if you can help him with something. And I said, what? This is the person that took over my customer, right? I said, I tell you what, and I kind of baited the person. I said, I tell you what, I told my secretary, I said, go ahead and tell him to send me an email because I'm a little busy. Okay. So they sent me an email legitimately with the person's full name, the company they work for, the restaurant they're working at, my old customer. And I'm paraphrasing this email. It says, hey, this is kind of an odd question, but I heard you were just here topping the system off. I'm up at the refrigeration rack right now, and I can't figure out which compressor controls that system. Would you mind giving me a call and telling me which compressor controls that system? I had a good laugh when I read that email. I didn't answer that email. And then 20 minutes later, but when I read the email, I laughed to myself, okay? And I understand life happens, right? And I'm not saying this to make fun of this person. I'm actually bummed out that this person doesn't have a support staff at their company to help them with these questions and that they had the gall to call me to ask me about my old customer. I'm not answering that question. You could just deal with that. But the funny thing was that this was a self-contained region. I'm not joking with you. Self-contained means the compressor is connected to it. The particular service technician was on the roof going through the refrigeration rack, looking at all the multiplex compressors, trying to figure out which compressor controlled the self-contained region that had the compressor connected 2.5 feet from where the evaporators were. I will say that the technician did figure it out because about 20 minutes later, I didn't answer the email. About 20 minutes later, got another email and it says, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I just realized the compressor's connected to the unit. But this is what blew my mind. When I knew that I heard that I lost that customer, I was really bummed out. I really was. I've dealt with that customer for a very long time. And there was just, and what happened, and this does happen in the corporate structures, is they got a new facilities director. The facilities director just cleaned house. He just changed up everything and, whatever. Again, life goes on. So I'm not mad at the company. I'm not mad at the service technician. I'm actually sad for the service technician because he clearly didn't have anybody else to call and he chose to call me at my company to ask me. That kind of blew my mind, but again, it's sad that he doesn't have the support staff to have to help him, and that's what's wrong with this industry right now is people are hiring anybody. And again, I'm not trying to make fun of the guy. Okay. I'm trying to point out the fact that he was willing to call the competition to ask for help instead of calling his boss to ask for help. So there's something wrong there. And I'm going to encourage all of you out there. If you work for a company like that, that isn't willing to help you, that doesn't have a support staff, don't work for them anymore. Move on because that's not a good company to work for. It really isn't. Okay. As a, with my technicians that work for me, I need to know what their weaknesses are. And it's not so that I can criticize them or ridicule them. It's so that way I know how to help them to grow and to learn. Okay. If you're working for someone, your management needs to know your weaknesses. And if they're going to criticize you because of your weaknesses, then that's not a good company for you. Okay. You need to move on because and I guess there's some circumstances where a company might be upset at someone's weaknesses, but still, maybe if you overinflated your experience or something like that, yeah, you got to do that. So again, I'm not making fun of the technician that reached out to me. I feel bad for that technician because he should have a good company to work for with a boss that he can communicate with and find out the answers to his questions, even if he was afraid to ask his boss. Because in my head, I thought about this. Maybe, just maybe, he didn't want to tell his boss that he didn't know how to do that. Okay. If that's the case, then you're doing yourself a disservice because you're lying to yourself. The way to make it in this industry is not just to wing it and try to figure crap out. If you truly want to be successful and you truly want to do right by the customer, you need to be properly trained and you need to know when to say, hey, I don't know how to do this, or when to ask for help. Okay. So let's go through the chat right now and see what else I'm missing in here. Okay. I'm reading through the chat, seeing what I'm missing. Yeah, that is gold, huh, Mike B? That was pretty crazy. Yeah. Let's see. They splurged on that company for sure. Exactly. Yeah, you know, and maybe they will, Mike B. Maybe they will call me back. I may or may not consider going back to that customer. I don't know. So, um, see what else we got going on in the chat right now. Reading through here. Al Anonymous says, I am the support staff. There you go. You know, but Al or Al Anonymous, again, I don't know what your name is, bro. I think I do. I've probably known it in the past. I don't know if it's Al or not, but you know, I'm the support staff at my company, but I also have people to call. I'm not afraid to call technical support. I'm not afraid to call a friend and ask for help. You know, you make those connections so you can use them when you need them, right? Um, Reading through the chat. What do we got? Also, at the show, Manitowoc says they're in the process of developing an app in which you can navigate the display remotely on your phone. William. Yeah, Manitowoc, I'm assuming you're talking about maybe the restaurant show that's going on or whatever, because there's like a restaurant expo or something like that going on. Manitowoc has been working on all kinds of stuff like that. I haven't heard that one about an app that you can control with your phone, but they're definitely probably trying to compete with True, because True Refrigeration just dropped their ice machine. It'd been in beta for like a year or two, but they just made it official, and it's got all kinds of crazy bells and whistles. I've yet to see one, but I heard it's pretty cool. So reading through the chat right now. What else do we got going on in here? Have I ever had a compressor explode? And if so, how bad was it? No, I've never had a compressor explode. In order for a compressor to explode, there'd have to be some serious stuff going on. And what I mean by that is, I mean, you can have a terminal vent where it blows a terminal out. It may seem like an explosion. I guess it kind of is, but it's really just a pressure release. Explosion in my head is when it explodes and shrapnel goes everywhere. And for something like that to happen, I mean, there would have to be a lot of like crazy stuff going on, because pressure controls, like all kinds of stuff would have to happen for a compressor to physically explode with a fireball and have shrapnel blow out. So, see what else. Reading through the chat. Oh, that's funny. Keith Peterson says that Survival called Chris for Linux's phone number. Yeah, that's funny. So Rick, HVACR Survival. Rick's a good friend of mine. We talk to each other on the phone quite often. We'll bounce ideas off of each other's heads. And Rick reached out to me just asking me a Linux question, and I didn't really have the answer, but I was like, he told me the customer he was working for, and I said, dude, I think they're a national account. So I have Linux national account phone number, which you have to prove that you're in a national account. But I uh I I was able to share that number with Rick. So it made his job easier, and he didn't have to wait on hold as long, right? Because the national accounts hold is usually less time than it is for just like the normal 800 number that everybody can call, where you have to wait on hold sometimes for hours and hours at end. Usually national accounts, I don't think I've ever been on hold with national accounts phone number for more than a half an hour. So usually pretty quick. Oh, okay. So William Werner says, so again, I read a question out of context, and he said, yeah, he is at the restaurant show. His previous comment asked if I had seen the True ice machine. Let's see. So he's saying the True ice machine is impressive, but he heard that they're only putting R290 in them, so they can only make up to a 800 series, is what he believes. Well, they actually raised the charge limitation, so you'd be surprised. I'm pretty sure they can make a bigger ice machine, but I'm sure they're working on it, because I think on ice machines you might be able to go up to 500 grams from 150 grams. So that's going to be a significant increase. And the very interesting thing about R290 refrigerant is you can do so much more work with a smaller amount. Now, there's a bunch of technical terms for that and stuff, but basically, if you had two identical systems, you know, the R290 system can do all the work for the same size refrigerator with 5 ounces of refrigerant versus a 404A system that would have 16 ounces of refrigerant, 14 ounces of refrigerant. Okay. So because you can do so much more with so little refrigerant, it's more efficient, and they could do a lot, you know, more with it. So with 500 grams, that's quite a bit of refrigerant. I would not be the least bit surprised if they can possibly start working on a bigger machine, especially with, you know, the efficiencies and different compressors and stuff too. I mean, as it stands, if you look at most ice machines out there, those numbers are nominal numbers too, because if it says 800-pound machine, it's probably only putting out 675 pounds of ice a day. But for some reason, the government allows them to like tweak some things to where they can say, oh yeah, but it's actually an 800-pound machine, because in a perfect lab setting, it'll do this much. and as the temperatures rise, the ambient temperatures rise, with ice machines, which is the same thing with refrigeration, the delivered capacity potential of the compressor basically reduces as the outdoor temperature goes up. So, if you have a 12,000 BTU compressor at 75-degree ambient, well, when you go to 110-degree ambient, that, BTU number significantly drops off the map. So anyways, but that's a whole tangent that I'm going off on there. Let's see. Gecko says, I used to drive for Uber, gave someone from Daikin a ride, and they said they're overworked and underpaid with no breaks. Well, I mean, is that not how every corporation is right now? I mean, we don't need to go down the rabbit hole of, conspiracy talk and stuff, but I mean, every corporation is squeezing out. It seems like there's a few good ones still, but a good majority of them are trying to squeeze out as much as they can out of everything. And they're kind of messing with the economy and everything. It's kind of crazy. But anyways, let's not go down that rabbit hole. That's a conversation for the HVAC Overtime Show, which is the shameful plug right here. I do a show with my friends on Friday evenings, 6:05 p.m. Pacific time. It's with my friend Adam Muffich, Bill Russell, and Joe whatever dude from Canada, right? HVACR North in the chat. You guys want to know the funniest thing about Joe is I've been friends, like fake internet friends with Joe online for like 4 or 5 years, maybe longer. I don't know. How long has it been, Joe? And Joe still won't tell me his last name. Still won't tell me where he lives. I don't know, man. So don't know his last name, but that's a fun thing. We'll make fun of Joe on the HVAC Overtime Show this week. So definitely come. Joe will be there. Joe's really good at hitting back sometimes. Every once in a while, Joe hits back, but he's usually a pretty good sport when we make fun of him because he knows some of the stuff and, it's a pretty fun thing. But HVAC Overtime Show on the HVAC Overtime YouTube channel, Friday evening, 6:05 p.m. Pacific. We'll go down talking about all that stuff. Let's see. Seven Sickos says, am I having a weird start to the season? He's in Coachella Valley, and although they are busy on new construction service calls are down. Yeah, it is a very strange year here in SoCal. For restaurants and refrigeration type work, it is really weird. It's very slow. It's starting to pick up. We're starting to get more work, but yeah, what I'm starting to notice is a lot of the customers, they're realizing that the economy is struggling. We have a lot of different reasons for the economy struggling in Southern California, but restaurants are struggling and they're doing their best. So it's good and bad. What I'm noticing is restaurants are trying to be more conscious of the money that they spend. They're trying to be more aware at overspending money versus 3-4 years ago. I would get overtime calls where the customer demanded I come out for the silliest things. That wasn't critical. That wasn't an emergency. And then we would have pushback from the restaurant because we'd be like, no, we're not coming out there for that tiny little reach in that you can just shut off and use another one for the weekend. But now they're only calling us out on true emergencies, at least my customers. We're not getting into that silly overtime work that we used to get. That while it was fun in the beginning, it got a little frustrating because, whatever. Sometimes, calls do get frustrating. Going off on a tangent, I went on a service call this weekend. Emergency exhaust fan down an hour away from my house. And then there was a freeway closure. So it took me about an hour and 20 minutes to get out to this job site. I got all the way out there. Their exhaust fan wasn't working. And, in the work order, the manager said, we checked the breakers. We did this, we did that. And so when I got there, I went up onto the roof and I had no power on the roof. And instantly I'm thinking, okay, the motor starter's tripped. Something happened. So isolated the exhaust fan, went downstairs to reset the motor starter. And it wasn't the motor starter. The breaker was off. And so I was confused because the manager told me they checked the breaker, right? So this is something that I wish I could have filmed this because my conversation with management, I don't go in there. It's not passive aggressive. I'm not trying to make them feel like an idiot, but I know that if you point blank ask someone a question that's going to basically make them realize how dumb they are, right? In a sense, that's what they're going to feel. I'm not saying they're dumb, but I mean, it's going to make them realize oh my gosh, I shouldn't have done that. Most of the time they won't answer truthfully. So what I did was when I found that breaker off, I troubleshooted everything. I ended up turning it on. The fan ran fine. It was running under current. Couldn't find anything wrong. So I went downstairs to try to figure out why the breaker was off. It wasn't tripped. It was off. I filmed this, but I didn't film the whole process. So when I went downstairs, they have an electrical circuit panel and it says fry exhaust. It's a 3-phase breaker and it was off. Okay. So, why was it off? Someone turned it off for a reason, you know? So I go ask the manager, and I'm like, did you turn this off? He's like, no. Okay. All right, cool. You know? And then, so then I ended up collecting all the managers. There was 3 on site, and I collected all the managers and I brought them over to the circuit breaker panel. And I said, look, here's the deal. I came out on an emergency service call. I found this breaker off. Usually that means that someone shut it off. Why? There's usually a reason. Was it making a noise? You know, who knows, right? And I'm trying to get to the bottom of this. So I said, all 3 of you guys together, I said, did one of you shut this breaker off that you know of? And they were like, no, nobody shut it off. And I go, okay. And I go, and I explained it to them, you know, because I try to figure why things happen. And I figure someone shut it off for a reason, you know? So what it ended up being was in that conversation, just having a conversation with them, just talking, right? And I wasn't like, you're dumb. No, I was just having a conversation, right? But I needed to get to this answer because I couldn't have closure until I figured out why the breaker was off. So I'm talking to the manager and I said, hey, did you guys get a freezer delivery today? Because their walk-in freezer, they'll shut off the breaker to do a delivery or something, you know? And I've seen that happen before, right? For the walk-in freezer. And the breaker for this exhaust fan happens to be in the same panel. So my head's, the little hamster in my head's spinning. And I'm sitting there thinking, I wonder if they accidentally shut off the wrong breaker, you know? No, they didn't get a delivery. And I'm like, okay. I said, when did you get a delivery? And they're like, yesterday. And I go, your exhaust fan was working yesterday, right? And they're like, yeah. And I go, did you shut the breaker off though for the walk-in freezer today for any reason? And one of the managers goes, yeah, I did. And I go, I know what happened. And he's like, what? And then the other 2 managers are like, what? And I go, watch. And I shut off the walk-in freezer breaker. Okay. And I go, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back on now. So thinking like someone who isn't dealing with electrical components all the time, right? I thought, if I turn this breaker on, flip, my hand ran directly across the panel, and right on the other side is the breaker for the exhaust fan. I go, turn the walk-in freezer on this morning, clip, hand runs across, and turned off the exhaust fan. And the manager, his eyes got big, and he goes, I did that. And I go, I mean, it happens. I'm glad we got to the bottom of this, you know? And then the other 2 managers were like, oh my gosh. And I go, see, I like to know why things happen, because I wanted to know if one of the cooks shut it off because it was making a noise, or, you know, who knows, right? And we got to the bottom of it. And I didn't call the manager an idiot. You know, it was frustrating. It was a frustrating call because I was getting ready to make dinner and I had to go out to that call to turn on a breaker, but it was also a learning lesson. And politely, I could teach that manager a lesson, right? And I could say, hey, look, you can prevent having to spend 2.5 hours of labor for me to come out and just turn something on. You know, actually, it was 3.5 hours of labor with the traffic that I had to sit in, because on overtime, we charge travel time there, travel time back, and whatever time it is on the job. So it was like 3.5 hours to turn a breaker on. But I dig into it. I don't just walk away. And at the same time, I was on the roof. I could hear other exhaust fans squeaking. I could hear makeup air units squeaking. I saw dirty filters for the outside air dampers on the makeup air units. The walk-in cooler had a dirty condenser. And I brought all that up to the customer and I said, hey, I'm out for today, but you really should put in a work order so I could get that other stuff taken care of so we don't have another one of these nuisance emergencies. And they were like, that's a great idea. So they did. So I found more work. I went in kind of being frustrated, but I changed my perspective because life happens. If they're not calling me, they're calling someone else. Let's think about it that way. So I could go to a job and I could get frustrated and I can get pissed off and I can show them an attitude and I can tell them they're dumb, right? But if they don't call me next time, they call someone else. And that means someone else is making the money. So I try to have a better attitude. I try to look at the big picture, try to give them value. Instead of just making them feel like they wasted my time, I gave them value because I educated them and I taught them. And that's what we all need to do. Service calls can be frustrating, but try not to let them get to you. Make the best out of it. Okay. Let's see what else is going on in the chat right now. Reading through the chat, aren't breakers mostly not rated to be used as switches and will fail? Gecko, I mean, yeah, there is some truth in that. You know, I don't know the exact numbers or statistics, but a circuit breaker is not really meant to be turned off every single day. And there is mechanical mechanisms inside of there. And those mechanical mechanisms do start to wear out over time. There's springs and different pieces to pull other pieces. And, there's all kinds of stuff in there. So the more you turn it off, the more chances you have of it failing for sure. Try to fix that within the restaurant industry. And I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, the way that we do is like, I would love for them to put in other switches and different things, but you got to think about it like this. The manager is usually turning off the breaker because they don't want those cold fans blowing on them. So if they can do something from out of the box and turn it off so that way they don't get a little chilly, they're going to do that rather than going inside the box and turning off a power switch in the box. So they're looking for the path of least resistance. They're not thinking about the long game. They're not thinking about the big picture. They just want to shut it off. So it happens in the restaurants and you just got to learn to deal with it. Let me see what else we got going on in the chat. So Mike B says, should have called them all idiots. Survival would have. Yeah, so Rick from HVACR Survival is funny. He's a character. So Rick definitely will go off on some tangents and some rants at times when he really gets frustrated. He kind of tells it like it is. So I will tell you, it's not good business. It's not good business. But I will say one of the funniest videos that I've seen from Steve Lavenmore on YouTube, look him up. He's a character. That dude, you'll never forget his personality because he's really a character. He's a plumber somewhere on the East Coast. I don't know, somewhere on the East Coast. He has a real thick accent. And I've heard him call customers on video, "You're an idiot," or you're some kind of stupid. And it's hilarious. I would never talk like that to my customers, but yeah, Steve really tells it like it is for sure. Boston, there you go. Yeah, that dude, or New York. There you go. Bohanger says, or Freon Leon. Yeah. It is New York. That's right. Yeah. Wait, no, is it Matt? I don't know. Everybody in the chat saying he lives somewhere else. Now Jason's saying Massachusetts, someone's saying New York, someone's saying Boston. I don't know. I know it's one of those because he has a real thick accent, but anyways. Yeah. But he's a funny dude. So definitely check it out. All right, so got a couple things I want to cover now that I've went off on a bunch of different rants. One of the more common questions that I get in my videos, there's two really common questions. Why in the heck do I use copper drain lines on everything? Why don't I use PVC? Because copper lasts longer. When you're on a roof, someone dragging a hose when the sun has been beating down on PVC, especially PVC from the 80s that's already been drenched for years, the hoses will get caught on the PVC and it'll snap the drain line below the roof deck. Trust me, this experience has happened to me too many times. It's just ridiculous. Okay. So I don't like using PVC because it gets brittle over time. Now I know they put a bunch of chemicals in the new crap, but I've been burned on PVC. Okay. Second is on ice machines. I use copper drain lines because restaurants tend to use squeegees to get underneath their ice machines. There's usually only about 6 inches of space under the bin on these older machines. Customers will get in there with squeegees and the squeegees will get stuck and they'll break the drain lines off behind the machines that are usually shoved in a pocket. Okay. And you can't get on both sides of the bin. It's usually shoved in a soffit or a hole. And then the drain line breaks underneath and it makes a giant mess on the floor. For that reason, I started using copper drain lines because I was sick of fixing those problems. Okay. So that's why I use copper drain lines. Another really common question that I get is why in the heck on our rooftop equipment are we piping the drains in? And why don't we just drain it onto the roof? A lot of people want to know, is there a law in California that says you can't just drain your condensate on the roof? Well, it's not necessarily a law that says you can't drain your condensate on the roof, but it's more or less the outcome of draining your condensate on most of our roofs. We have two types of drains on our roof. You have floor drains that usually go to the sewers, and then you have roof overflow drains that typically go over the side of the building. Okay. In the state of California, most of our runoff and our water ends up making it to the storm drains. Okay. The storm drains go through minimal cleaning before they go to the ocean, just very minimal because it's a storm drain. It's usually just runoff and oils and different things, which still needs to be cleaned, right? Because there's a lot of runoff, but still they don't treat it the same as they do raw sewage. Okay. So it's usually a code, especially near the coast or especially in places that their water goes into the storm drain system from the runoff of the roof, that those drains be plumbed into the sewers. Okay. And that's why you see us piping our drains into the roof and going down to common drain lines. And then it's going into the sewer to where it can be processed because that water inevitably is going to make it to the ocean. Okay. But runoff from the streets, it does get cleaned. And so the roof overflows or the roof drains are typically what go off the side of the building. and that just ends up making it to the storm drain. So that's why they want us plumbing them. Okay. All right. Just bought 400 foot of flat hoses and a transfer pump. Send some buckets this weekend. Oh yeah. Sent some buckets this weekend. Right on, man. Yeah, the flat hoses are getting better and better. I still have a hard time taking them through restaurants because I've seen one get cut in a restaurant and made a giant mess, and I was in the walk-in and didn't even know that it was happening, and it was just a pain. So I still use rubber hoses for the most part. John Mendoza wants to know if I'm going to sell any sun hats with the drapes anytime in the future. Yeah, I really do want to. I definitely spent a lot of time last year going through samples, but I never found a hat that I truly felt like was worth selling it. So I'm still kind of looking. That is something I would love to do. If you don't already know, I do sell merchandise on my website, hvacrvideos.com. This hat right here, and I'll explain to you the thought. Like I obsess about everything. Okay. So this particular hat, I wanted a hat that had a black underbill because I didn't want to show as much dirt, right? Because when I go to work, my hands get dirty. I grab my hat, then I go home and I go to put the hat on and it's like, oh, it's real dirty, or I got to stare up at gunk, right? So I searched and searched until I found a hat with a black underbill. Then I wanted to have the hat that it wasn't advertising my brand. It was advertising my color scheme and the acronym HVACR, because I didn't want to conflict with your guys' uniform policies. I wanted you to be able to wear these hats at work. And a good majority of people do wear these hats at work because it's not a HVACR videos logo advertising my company. It's not my company name. It's my color scheme and my acronym HVACR, right? And so the other thing is that this is a breathable hat. This does really well in the sun. It's going to be really hard for you guys to see this, but I can see through this hat. It's so hard to explain, but it's not a trucker hat. So it's breathable and you don't sweat. So I put I hyper obsess about things. So for me to do the sun hat, it's got to be that perfect hat. And I just haven't found it yet. So when I do find it, rest easy. I'll definitely put it up on the website for sure. And my website is hvacrvideos.com. So, see what we got here. Seven Sickos says he puts so much salt on his hats from sweating. Yeah, that does happen a lot. These hats do wash up pretty weird. So, I'm sorry, pretty well, but over time, salt's definitely gonna have a hard time. So, am I running copper drains on ductless? Do I deal with many? I don't deal with very many ductless. I probably only ever installed 3 or 4 in my career, maybe 5 at the most. I have maybe 2 customers with ductless units, and I really don't have to service them that much. So I'm going to have to replace one of them because it's in a greasy kitchen and it's a really expensive Mitsubishi one, and it's just completely impacted with grease. So they're going to have to replace the whole thing. So that'll be coming up sometime soon. What type of vacuum pump brand is good to use? Steven, it really depends on, a brand that you trust. That's the biggest thing. Now, personally, I use a Field Piece vacuum pump, and I really do like Field Piece. They, for the most part, make really good products, and I have worked with them in the past. Recently, just worked with them, and I used to do beta testing for them, and they have some pretty good products. And that vacuum pump that they have is the one that I use, and my recovery machine. I like the Field Piece VPX7 and the MR45 recovery machine. Those are my go-to machines right now. But again, that doesn't mean that has to be yours. That's just the ones that I like. Some people complain that Field Piece, the stuff keeps breaking. But then you hear people on social media and they're like, they have a really good warranty policy. They usually take care of everything. But then you hear people on the other side of the country saying, yeah, but they want to charge me $150 to ship it back, and it's just too much. So one of the things that benefits me, that pushes me towards Field Piece, is I'm local to them. They're 45 minutes from where I live. So when I have broken tools, I take them there. So I don't ever have to deal with the shipping thing that other people complain about. So the point that I'm making is I like Field Piece. It doesn't mean that you have to. There's just a lot of factors that go into it, and I genuinely enjoy their tools. Have I used induction heaters for copper brazing instead of gas? No, but I've definitely seen a lot of induction heaters on social media. It's like a trend right now. Nothing looks like it would really work with the stuff that I do. I mean, every once in a while you might be able to use one, but and then the next question is how much current on those are those induction heaters pulling? I mean, they make the more powerful ones, they're going to pull more current, and that's another thing you got to think about. Are you plugging into a 10 amp receptacle, 15 amp, 20 amp, 30 amp? How big does it need to be? Anyways, that's a whole nother thing. Let's see. Why do I put up with HVAC North? HVAC North is just a good friend. Let me tell you what's good about Joe. When you want to have a conversation with someone, Joe's there to listen. He really is. And Joe typically will give you good advice or ask questions. He's always willing to help. So Joe is what I consider to be a friend. Today I was just telling him that, you know, I was just telling him something that I have going on right now, and he was totally willing to help with all kinds of cool ways. And that's really awesome of Joe. So Joe is a friend. So we make fun of him just like normal friends do. The guys all make fun of me. I make fun of them. Joe makes fun of it. You know, we all just do it back and forth in a nice way. We all just make fun of each other and we're just friends. So we put up a front saying that Joe's this horrible person because he won't tell us where he lives. That's really us just poking at him, you know? Again, Joe's a cool dude. Do I anneal copper to bend lines? What happens to burnt recovered refrigerant? Can it be cleaned, recycled, and reused? Yes, I have annealed copper to do lines. It's not something I do all the time, but I have done it several times to make copper lines look really neat. For sure. Yeah, I've annealed it. What happens to recycled refrigerant? Refrigerant typically gets taken back and gets taken apart and separated and contaminants taken out of it and somehow recycled. Some of it, when they'll break down the components to safe, you know, mixtures, and they'll burn it off or do different things, right? I've heard that. But the other thing they'll do too, depending on the refrigerant, is they'll clean it and resell it or reuse it, right? So we can take that refrigerant, R22, right? Because you can't import or produce new R22 within the United States. It's against the law. So you can only use recovered recycled refrigerant. So now they'll take the R22, they'll take it back, they'll clean it, they'll purify it, and they'll, you know, rebrand it as, you know, cleaned refrigerant or whatever, and then we'll use it again. So yes, refrigerant can be taken care of. We break it down. Let's see. Southeast HVAC asks, why use a core depressor? So I have some little Appion core depressors that you twist them and they depress the cores. Okay. So the question is, why am I using those? Well, because we have two different types of Schrader cores. We have a CoreMax core, which is a very large core. It is not removable while the system's in operation with normal tools that we have on our trucks, okay? And there's the little tiny cores that we have special vacuum core removal tools. So when it comes time to charge and evacuate, a Schrader is a restriction, okay? And a Schrader depressor is a restriction, all those, okay? So if we can remove that restriction, we can make it easier to recover refrigerant, evacuate systems, charge refrigerant. We can speed up the process. So why would I use a Schrader core depressor when a hose from a manifold gauge set has a core depressor in it? Oftentimes it's for evacuations reasons, to be honest with you. Core depressors, though, I'm typically only using them on systems that have the high flow Schraders, the CoreMax fittings, because you can't remove those, you know, during operation. So I'll use the core depressors because they're vacuum rated, and then I can go from my vacuum pump directly to the system without having to use service gauges that have core depressors in them, if that makes sense. What happens? Rick asked, what happens if you put the wrong cleaner on a microchannel condenser when you're trying to clean it? Well, there is Brightener cleaners that we use in this industry. They will break down some of the strict, you know, the stingiest greases and different things. But really what they are, a Brightener cleaner is really etching the coil. It's taking off a layer of the aluminum and making it look like it cleaned it when really it just disintegrated a layer of that aluminum. Okay. It etches the coil. So if you use a microchannel or a coil brightener on a microchannel condenser, microchannels are 100% aluminum, and the aluminum is part of the refrigerant circuit. So if any of the aluminum, you know, has enough corrosion and it leaks through, it's going to leak out the refrigerant in the system, right? So you don't want to use the cleaners that etch the coil because they can damage the microchannel coil and reduce its life expectancy, basically. So that's what's going to happen with that. DYL is saying, do I ever worry about wasting so much water from coil cleaning? I mean, it's on the back of my mind, but until they come up with a better way, you know, I still have to stay profitable. And of course, I'm concerned about the environment, and I'd love to adopt a new method where I wouldn't have to use so much water to clean equipment. But unfortunately, the technology is not quite there to be able to clean equipment without using much water effectively in the types of kitchens that I'm working with. They make rinseless cleaners and things. Yeah, they do. But you know, when you have real severe grease buildup and different things like that, you need water. Sometimes you need hot water, and you need caustic chemicals that are going to help to clean off that grease, which are also going to have other effects. So, you need to use water to rinse that stuff off. Gary asks, where can he find? Oh, this is a great question. Okay. Gary wants to know where he can find a list of common kind of rules of thumb for evaporator TDs, because he notices from refrigeration to ice machine to air conditioning to different types of refrigeration systems, the evaporator TDs is going to change. And that's very true. It all has to do with the efficiency of the system. And when we're saying evaporator TD, we're talking about the suction saturation temperature, okay, versus the surface temperature. I'm sorry, I'm having a brain fart here right now. But we're talking about the saturated temperature difference from the air temperature. Okay. I was going down the wrong path there with the answer to that question. But yeah, it's going to change from air conditioning to refrigeration, and it's also going to change from manufacturer to manufacturer. So there's no like 100% way to say that the evaporator TD is going to be this on every single system out there. Okay. There isn't, because each manufacturer beats to the tune of their own drum. So you know, in a refrigeration system, walk-in cooler, you might see an evaporator TD anywhere from, you know, 8-9 degrees all the way up to 15 to 20 degrees. It's going to range depending on the type of product and how the system was sized. Is the compressor oversized? There's a lot of different variables that go into that. So evaporator TDs are always going to change. And even if you want a system to have a perfect design, there's times that you can't do that with modern equipment. Well, now that we're getting more technology, you kind of can have oversized condensing units. But anyways, that's a whole tangent for another day. Mario. So there's no great, sorry, to answer that question, Gary, there's no 100% answer. There's some ways to backwards calculate it, though. Oftentimes, if you call manufacturers, they won't tell you superheat, subcooling, or TDs, but they'll tell you operating pressures at ambient temperatures and indoor conditions. They'll tell you those. And so you can backwards calculate a TD. If you knew indoor conditions and refrigerant pressures, you could figure out evaporator TDs, you know? So you could backwards figure it out, if that makes sense. Feel free to shoot me an email. We can talk more about it, but hvacrvideos@gmail.com. Mario made a point that I should do a better, or that I should always be teaching my technicians to cycle thermostats to make sure that refrigeration equipment pumps down before we leave the job site. Okay. And he's making a valid point, but you also have to understand that sometimes you can't wait for the equipment to come down to temp. Sometimes you don't get to see that kind of stuff. He's referring to a video where I said I changed a pressure control on a walk-in, and I said we'd changed that compressor 2 times in the last couple of years. And I was like kind of concerned, right? It had a failed pressure control now, and I caught it before it damaged the compressor again, hopefully. But he was saying, you know, we should always cycle the thermostats. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Just depends on the situation. It doesn't help, though, that that particular customer doesn't do very good routine maintenance. So we're not there on a regular basis anymore to be able to, you know, catch these problems. So this is just stuff that's going to happen. When it came to that pressure control video, excuse me, had to take a drink there. When it came to that pressure control video, why didn't I pump down the receiver and pull the hoses off then to change the pressure control? Because the problem that I ran into in that video was that the pressure control was installed on the high side, not in a place that I could valve it off. And I don't think there's a Schrader below the hose. So I can't remove the hose because it's stuck in the system unless I remove the entire refrigerant charge. And I think it was 27 pounds on that system, or maybe even 40. It's a big system. So it might be like 40, but regardless, you can't isolate the pressure control the way that it was installed. There's nothing you can do. Someone else mentioned that it had one of those little, not rubber hoses, but they're like a vinyl plastic hose or whatever, polyethylene or something. That particular hose, someone was saying I could have pinched it to try to shut off the flow. And I thought about that, but I just didn't want anything to happen with it. And it was easy enough just to move the pressure control up, and we'll deal with it when we, you know, have an issue again. So let's see what I got going on in the chat. What else do we got going on in here? Floating head, right? So I'm assuming they're talking about different ways to oh, that's a really good. I like that topic with the floating head pressures too. So, but anyways, I don't know what the context is, and it's way too high. Hot Rod TV says, "Do I have any tips on cleaning an HVAC rooftop evaporator coil? You're cleaning one for the first time tomorrow." Well, okay. So the biggest thing with cleaning an evaporator coil on a package unit is if it's a downshot package unit, you got to keep that water from going down into the return. On most units, it'll just drop right into the return, and you don't want it in the return because it leaks out of different places, right? So you got to make sure when you're cleaning package unit evaporators that you have something there to keep that water from going down. And I don't have like a blanket answer, but I've used tarps, I've used giant industrial trash bags with weights to keep the water running off the package unit. There's all kinds of different methods you can do, but it's very critical that you do that and make sure that if you do put something above the return, make sure that it has the strength, because I've literally seen people do that and then it'll fill up with so much water that the whole dang bag will drop down, and all that water they tried to prevent going in the ductwork ends up going in the ductwork. I've had people do that. Okay. So you got to make sure if you put something over there, it's going to stay secure. Let's see what else we got going on in the chat. Mike B says he likes Refrigeration Technologies Viper in a can. Also depends on the size of the evaporator. Yeah, and the Viper in the can is great, but when you have like extremely greasy situations, it's a problem. What I really like about the Viper in the can is the propellant that it has. And it does have degreasing capabilities for mildly greased up condensers. That stuff's great, but the propellant will oftentimes shoot dust out. So it'll coat the coil with a cleaner, but then also shoot dust out the back. So it does a double whammy cleaning kind of. That stuff's good. All right. Should I change a pressure control every time I change a compressor to try to prevent this problem from happening where the compressors kept failing? I mean, I guess, but at the same time, I try not to change needless parts, right? Or parts that don't need to be changed. But there's some things that I do. If I change a compressor, I'm always going to investigate if I change a compressor, I change starting components. If it's a single phase, no questions asked. But if I change a compressor, I might change a contactor on a 3-phase system, but I'm going to investigate it, look at it, because usually you can visually see those, right? But if I have a grounded compressor on a heat pump and it has a reversing valve, I'm going to tell you what, a reversing valve gets changed with the compressor on a burnout, a severe burnout. That's one of the things I always do. So there's always going to be different things that you do based on past experiences. But, am I always going to change a pressure control with a compressor? No, it just depends. You're going to investigate things. Super Text says, yes, change the safeties if you don't know what caused compressors to fail. I mean, yeah, that is an argument to be made for sure. That is an argument to be made. Depends on how easy it is to change the safety, I guess, So, reading through here. All right. I jumped in a video. The video recently, I think I was working on the Linux package unit and I was, or train package unit. And I jumped like that or something like that on camera. Something scared me. I don't remember what it was. I think I heard a noise or something. And I remember doing it. I did it recently in another video where I think today's video or a video that I shot over the weekend, I think I did the same thing where I jumped for some reason. Something scared me. I'm easily fragile or scared or whatever. All right, cool. That's that one. Why not? Oh, great question. Okay. So I had a train spaceship that I had a VFD fail on, and I changed the VFD. Okay. And a lot of people were asking me, why in the heck didn't I just change the brand of the VFD? Okay. It had a Mitsubishi drive in there, or no, a Danfoss drive in there. And, with Train's name on it, it cost $10 million, whatever it was, right? It was super expensive. But why didn't I put another brand VFD in there? Because I didn't want to have to program the thing. You know how many parameters are set in those things to do different things? I don't even want to get involved in that much stuff right now. I got enough stuff going on. I'm not going to try to change and reinvent the wheel by changing a VFD brand. There's too many things you got to program, and I don't speak VFD. So, it's difficult. I'd really have to work at that one to reprogram an entire VFD. Sounds like headache. John L says, dumb question, but on that compressor with the head pressure control, is there a Schrader valve? I don't think there is, John. And that was the reason why I unthreaded the pressure control hose about maybe 2 or 3 turns, and it wasn't stopping. So I wasn't willing to let it just go. So I just stopped and said, we'll deal with it later. Trevor Phillips said he had aux contacts on a contactor pulling the third leg slightly off, single phasing the compressor. The supply house opted to change out all 9 contactors and add relays for crankcase heaters. That's pretty good, man. That's a crazy one, though, for sure. What type of compressor did that rocket ship train have? VFD compressor or unloader? It had a VFD compressor. It has, I think that unit is a like a convertible unit. It can go from like 10 tons to 18 tons or something with the different staging that they can do, because they have one compressor that has a VFD and then 2 fixed compressors, and it has dehumidification. It has variable speed condenser fan motors, ECM motors. It has just all kinds of stuff. It was just a spaceship, man. So all right, let's see what else. And don't get me wrong, I know technology is great and we need it in this industry, but I'm talking about for a restaurant, it was overkill. The train salesman just blew his load on that one, because I'm sorry. And what I didn't tell you too is they sold a restaurant on a controls package too that controls their lights and the HVAC system. They have the train concierge system there, and it's just overkill for that restaurant. They don't need that stuff, right? They have nothing hooked up to the concierge system, so they have to call train out to change parameters when they want to. It's a pain in the butt. So they just went nuts. Was that a train reheat system? No, it wasn't a reheat, but it is a train system. So Jason said you can upload all the VFD parameters to the display unit and clip that to the new VFD. Yeah, so that's essentially what I did. Essentially was, I changed the VFD but swapped the heads, basically. So, or swapped the displays, so the programming went with it. So all right, so that's why I just stick with the OEM parts whenever I can. But there's times that I consider moving away from OEM. Like for instance, this weekend I had a service call out for a refrigeration system that had a really interesting failure. A plastic bag, trash bag, got sucked underneath the condenser coils 3/8 of an inch under the condenser coil. It got sucked under that, wrapped itself around the condenser fan motor, and then when it tried to pull it through the rest of the condenser, it got caught on the corner of the condenser, so it seized up the condenser fan motor. Okay, there'll be a video for this soon eventually. You guys are getting a sneak peek. But I ended up taking the bag off, and after I let the motor cool down, it started up. It's not running amazing, but it started up and it's running. It ran through the weekend. So I'm going to go back and change that condenser fan motor. It's a particular refrigeration manufacturer. And I was looking today and I found the condenser fan motor, the OEM one, but holy moly, it's almost $400. So that's a time that I might, and it's a PSC motor. Okay. There's nothing fancy about it. It's a PSC motor. I just got to verify the shaft size, but there's a very good possibility I'm going to use an aftermarket part on that, because almost $400 for a PSC, like 3/4 horsepower condenser fan motor. That's way too much money, my cost. So I might end up using an aftermarket part, but sometimes I will, sometimes I won't, but it just depends on every situation. So Justin asked, responding to my pressure control video, Justin said, hey, he was curious because he's done this before and he'd be curious what my thoughts on this were. And he says, what if I was to just recover some of the refrigerant just to get the system down to a lower pressure, and then do a hot swap on the pressure control where I have 510 PSI in there. You just pop off the control, twist on the new one. I can argue in that situation, you're going to lose less refrigerant by twisting it off for a second than you would doing an evacuation, because evacuation is going to dehydrate and put so much refrigerant in the atmosphere. Anyways, but we can argue about that for days. I still think a hot swap sometimes will be better. But anyways, but he's asking, can I have just done a hot swap? That's what he did. What's my thoughts? I mean, if you can safely do it, I see that hot swaps can be quick and effective, and I don't think that they're really harming much, in my opinion. So yeah, I'll do a hot swap for sure. Total Tech says Chris is using aftermarket motors now. No, don't get me wrong. I still will sell, 2-speed condenser fan motors for walk-in coolers and freezers. I'll still put the OEM ones back in. Those are expensive, but they're there for a purpose. And as long as most of the time I leave 2-speed motors on walk-ins, I'll leave them, and freezers, I leave them in the 2-speed mode when I'll install equipment until I have ice up problems. If I have freeze up problems, then I'll put them in single speed mode and permanently, and then don't even let them cycle on the different speeds. But I try to go back with the OEM as much as possible in those situations. As long as I'm not having freeze up issues, I'll still put the 2-speed motors back in. So it's not that I'm not going to use OEM. It's not that I am. It's just going to be, every situation is going to be different. So Let's see where to put the sensing bulb. Oh, great question. Okay, so I had a video a while back where I was doing some refrigeration work and I was installing some TXVs. I think it was a HVACR system, a really small one. And when I was all done, it was a tiny little like 1200 BTUs flat evaporator coil on these HVACR units. And the TXV sensing bulb is usually mounted about 4 inches away from the evaporator outlet. And I mounted it on the bottom of the 3/8 inch line. And the person that brought this up to me was saying, wouldn't it have been better to mount it on the top? Okay. And actually, on small lines like that, it really doesn't matter. If they did have oil logged in those lines, it'd be so minimal. It's not going to affect it like it is on a large diameter pipe. When you have, 7/8 and up, that's when you really, really, in my opinion, need to get critical about sensing bulb placement. But when you're dealing with the smaller lines, the half inches, the 3/8, I wasn't too concerned about having the sensing bulb on the bottom. It's not really going to do much. The whole theory is that there'd be enough oil in there that oil would insulate the sensing bulb from the refrigerant line, or refrigerant temperature, basically. And on a 3/8 inch line, that's not really going to happen, in my opinion. So let me see, what do we got going on here? Nasty says he does hot swaps on contactors. Yeah, that's when you're getting a bit sketchy there, bud. So I know you're being sarcastic, but reading through the chat. All right. Well, so what's up with you guys? We kind of talked at the beginning of the stream. Someone asked me and I confirmed we're having a slow start to the season. It's really kind of strange. Customers are really trying to pinch pennies, which I get it. The economy is weird right now. It's an election year. Those are always dumpster fires. I hate election years. Oh my gosh, they're horrible. But everybody's trying to save money right now with the way things are. So yeah, the economy is definitely interesting, and we've gotten off to a slow start. We're slowly starting to pick up, but I mean, at the end of last year, I was thinking about hiring 2 technicians, and I'm glad I didn't, because we don't have the work for those 2 technicians that I would have hired, last year. We just don't have it right now. So, let's see, reading through the chat right now. All right. Reading through right now. Thinking about moving to Arizona. California is stupid expensive, 7 Sickos says. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie and say the thought hadn't crossed my mind, but I'm not moving anytime soon. So, all right. Well, it is time for me to wrap it up. I need to go get some dinner. I really do appreciate you guys making it here. I'm going to cue up the outro music, and the dogs will be in here in just a minute. So we will catch you next week. Remember, HVAC Overtime Show, Friday evening, 6:05 p.m. Pacific, and we will catch you on the next one.